All right, we're jumping in with Chip Oscarson and Phil Fernberg of the LDS Earth Stewardship Organization. How are you two?
Doing great.
Doing great. Happy to
Thanks
be
for having
Awesome.
here.
us on.
Yeah, I was mentioned to you before. Like, I don't know. I think it was around this past conference time. I saw a random tweet from your organization. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know this LDS Earth Stewardship was a thing or existed, and I'm intrigued. So I went to your website and checked it out, and reached out, and you two were willing to sit down with me virtually and talk about your organization and what it is and whatnot. But maybe let's first put you two into context. Chip, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you from, what you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm from the Midwest originally, from kind of born and raised in St. Louis, although our family moved around quite a bit growing up. And more recently, I've been here in Utah teaching at BYU. I teach literature and film here. Right now, I'm also an administrator at BYU and helping out with the general education program. Uh, and I got involved with LDS Earth Stewardship. Oh goodness, probably about 7, 8 years ago, kind of the early days of the organization. Just because I've been interested in things connected to the environment. I'm someone who likes the outdoors and has been academically interested in in some of the interest some of these issues as well. And it was great to find Latter Day Saints who likewise saw this as an important issue. And I think one of the things that drew me to it was, not just that I felt that there were, important issues in my kind of neighborhood and, kind of nationally and even globally that I felt needed to be dealt with, but I had a sense that there was a kind of a spiritual dimension to them as well, and really appreciated some of the readings of articles that I had read by LDS scholars who were trying to articulate, is there something special that Latter Day Saints have to contribute to this conversation? And I think that that's exactly what LDS Earth Stewardship does as an organization, is tries to help us better understand, the spiritual principles behind stewardship, and so that's kind of how I got involved.
That's cool. All right, and Phil, maybe put yourself into context and then your connection to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from Southern California, nondescript suburb outside of San Diego. And I have been around a bit, led a couple of past lives as an entertainer and other things. So I've lived kind of around the country and different parts of the world. But
So, what sort of entertainment did you do?
I was a cruise ship entertainer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was an assistant cruise director on ships. And if you've ever seen the show Love Boat, I was the Julie. um yeah, and I was with Disney for a bit too, and did played in some touring indie rock bands and stuff. It was fun.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, and then I kind of made my way back to academia and was got turned on to landscape architecture and environmental planning. That really that's what I've trained in and is now kind of the field that I'm in. I'm up at Utah State now. I couple of years ago moved from the Bay Area here to pursue doctoral work, and then I'm also teaching up here at Utah State in landscape architecture. And I kind of similar to Chip, I was really turned on to LDS or stewardship from coming into a profession that, at least in recent decades, has felt that it's been a little more secular and that it's always sort of divorced from religion. And it's kind of odd because to me, I've always felt that it was a part of who I was as a Latter-day Saint to also care for the earth, because we have so much doctrinal base for it. But I just never felt that it was culturally there, at least in the times that I've been growing up in my LDS circles. And so I actually originally heard of the organization through Chip because he was one of my mentors in my undergrad degree. He was one of my Scandinavian studies teachers and mentors.
Oh, cool.
And I knew that he was involved, but I just didn't know much about it then. And then, years later, after being trained and practicing in environmental sectors, I thought, I should look into that again, especially when I got back to Utah and got reconnected to Chip. So I went to their fall forum, and then very quickly after said, okay, I need to get involved. It's my time. And I did. And that was about a year and some change ago, and I was just recently put into the board and am now the board chair. And so that's my involvement with it, and I've just loved it, loved every minute of it. And I very much resonate with what Chip said. I think that it's an organization that really helps us kind of bridge that gap between the spiritual underpinnings of stewardship to our culture and ways of practicing it, and even our ways of serving in our communities as Latter-day Saints who have a unique and specific doctrine about the earth and our relationship to it.
Yeah. So, Chip, maybe this is it sounds like both of you're not founding members of the board or anything, but Chip, maybe just give us a brief history of this organization and how it started and whatnot.
Well, it started by a group of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who recognized a need, and I don't remember the exact date that it started. It's about 10 years ago. It's about a decade, a little over a decade maybe. That there was a need to get this conversation going, and a feeling that the conversation had in too many ways been hijacked by political concerns, and had been politicized. And if you look at the history of some of these issues, here in our country, there was a time when they were not politicized in the way that they are now. Things like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. That these were passed back in the 70s with broad bipartisan support. And it's more recent years that, for a whole host of reasons, I think that some of these issues became to be seen that if you're worried about kind of care of the earth, that aligns you with one end or the other of the political spectrum. And I mean, something that you notice right away, one, if you're a scholar of history and you kind of recognize that this is a kind of recent thing, but if you travel abroad and speak with members of the church, you recognize this as well, that they don't have the same kind of political lines. And I remember having a conversation with some members of the church in Sweden once, and we got into some of these issues that they knew I was interested in, and and their comment was, "Yeah, that is kind of strange that we don't hear more about that at church," because for them, this wasn't a liberal conservative kind of issue at all. And that was what I think the founding members of the organization recognized, is that we need to have a way to talk about this that sidesteps some of those those kind of political concerns, because what's at stake here is a much larger spiritual principle. And we need to get better information out about what is it that the scriptures say about these things. What is it church leaders have said about these? And so one of the big projects, initial projects of the organization, was to pull together a kind of a library of of quotes and about what we know about our relationship to the physical creation. And that still resides on our website. That's something we keep updated as a resource for people to consult. And just to kind of speak to this issue, one of my favorite quotes that that's there comes from Ezra Taft Benson, who of course is not known for his liberal politics, right? But he was speaking to a graduating class at BYU Hawaii, and the gist of the quote is that it's going to be your job to kind of go out into the world and to explain the challenges that humans face in regards to their physical environments. And he says, but if you don't understand the spiritual kind of laws that these are predicated on, you're going to fail. Mm-hmm. And I think I think he's absolutely right about that there's this spiritual dimension to these questions. And as Phil was alluding to earlier, if you look at the kind of history of environmental discourse, especially in the last few decades here in the United States, it's tended to be fairly secular in a lot of ways. It hasn't made a place for Christianity or for the LDS faith specifically at the table, and that's a real shame, because we have an incredibly rich doctrine about the purpose of creation, that why God created the earth, what He expects of us as stewards of this creation, and the way that our care of the earth is intimately related not only to our our love of God and our expressions of faith in Him and in the atonement, but also with our care of our fellow men. And
Hmm.
so this is the kind of the motivation. And the people who have been members of this organization, we're kind of started here on the Wasatch Front. Initially that's where a lot of the members have been or have connections here, but more recently have spread out, and now we have local organizations on in Europe and in Africa and in Asia. So we're it's very much spreading, and it is a message that that resonates.
Yeah. Wow. And I know from different environmentally focused groups or individuals, there's always been this this plea, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but if this is such a big problem, like why aren't we hearing about it in general conference? And then this past October, uh, 2022, Bishop Cosse stood
That's
up
great.
and his talk's called our earthly stewardship. So what was the reaction from your group? I mean, were you expecting this? What came? What was there an excitement when you heard this discussed, or maybe what comes to mind?
Yes, there was sheer and utter excitement on our end. I mean, it's very helpful for us who's we're an organization with stewardship in our namesake. So that's that was something that was very, very surreal for us, and also fulfilling of many members of LES or Stewardship's years long desires that they were hoping to see, which is that on the world stage of General Conference, we would have one of our leaders talking specifically and directly to the needs of Latter-day Saints to be engaged in our stewardship. It was wonderful. I mean, for me, it was surreal to see that, but also it was something that I felt is just a return to order on the issue of the environment within the church, because as Chip has already said, and we've mentioned several times, there's precedent for church leaders, including the founding members of the Restored Church. Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, these early prophets talked about these things often, especially as the saints were relocating into a new territory, trying to get used to the landscapes and the ecologies of the Wasatch Front. This is something that's not new, but it seems new. So I like that we're back in. I hope that it sets a precedent for us having a norm of speaking about this over the pulpit, not
Yeah.
only in conference, but in our local congregations.
Yeah.
Well, and there's been discussion of this. I mean, Phil, references this, but there's been a newsroom kind of section on the church website for some time,
Mm-hmm.
detailing what the church's views, of this, how they understand the doctrine. There was a wonderful address given by Elder Marcus Nash at a symposium
Hmm.
at the U, an interfaith symposium up at the U a few years ago. That he was there as kind of a representative of the church to talk about the church's understanding and position on questions relating to our responsibility in regards to the environment, and that kind of forms the basis of of what was there. So this is a wonderful complement to that. And it's as an organization, we've had people like Sister Eubank come and address us, um, and we see that this is very much something that concerns our leaders. From her perspective, it's not only a question of caring for the environment, for the sake of caring for a gift that God has given to us, but she very much sees the connection between this and the kinds of humanitarian crises that we're looking at. I mean, already, we know that things like climate change and other issues are making natural disasters more severe. And this has an impact not only on members of the church, but of course on millions and millions worldwide. And one of the real concerns is that the people who are most affected by this are the most vulnerable among us. And as committed Christians, this should concern us. And we have an obligation and need to be reminded sometimes of the way that we're connected to each other.
And that was something that Bishop Cosse also mentioned specifically in his talk as one of his principles, right? Or just after talking about the idea of earth stewardship being not just a political or scientific endeavor, but a spiritual mandate that we have, he then just after that basically speaks almost along those same exact lines. And it makes sense because the presiding bishoprics, one of their main directives is to care for the most vulnerable in the world.
Mm.
And so these are connected issues. And also, kind of when you were saying that, Chip, it made me think about the fact that there is a lot going on that should be better recognized within the church as an organization. You know, I've talked with many people who are either facilities managers within the church, landscape architects that work for them. There's now an official sustainability coordinator within the presiding bishoprics office. These are people who are working to help be better stewards of the environment over the actual holdings that the church has and the stakes that we have in the earth. So I think that there's work going on, but now it's about that pervasion into our kind of cultural airwaves. That's really important.
Yeah. And Chip, I think you referenced earlier just the dynamic of politics when it comes to this topic. For whatever reason, I mean, it can be so polarizing. Just, I mean, someone going to your website and seeing Earth Stewardship is like, oh, a bunch of liberal progressives, you know, in the church, you know, like it's so easy to jump to those conclusions, or, you know, assume that there's a hidden agenda here or a political agenda or whatnot. Like, what is there to learn about just like how can we approach this issue, both sides of the aisle, or no matter what your persuasion, without getting too political about it or just being repulsed by the politics of it?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. If you go to the website, you'll see that we are an adamantly apolitical organization. We have members, both membership as well as on our board from kind of both sides of the political aisle here in the country, and ones that stand outside of that, right? That as well. And for us, that's really important that that we think about this as an issue that. Well, let me put it this way. The the environment is not a problem to be fixed, right? It's not, there's not a specific issue that, well, we just need to fix this and it's kind of taken care of, and then we can kind of move on to other sorts of other sorts of issues. It's a relationship, and it's a responsibility, maybe better said, that God has given to us, right? And so, learning how to take care of that's an ongoing kind of question, and circumstances change about what that's going to mean. What is not an option, it seems to me, is to ignore the question.
Mm.
Right? So to put it in another context, how we care for the poor, there's a lot of different ways to go about doing that, and there's not one right way to do it. The only wrong thing is not to care for the poor. And
Hmm.
likewise, for the environment, this is a gift that has been given, to us by our Creator, and we have a responsibility to it. We talk about this a lot in the church in terms of our bodies, right? That our bodies are a gift from God, and even though we believe that one day we're going to be resurrected and kind of made whole, again, that doesn't mean that I can abuse it now. Right, that
Hmm.
it's part of my respecting my body is showing gratitude and reverence, for the Creator. And with the environment, it goes a step further insofar that my choices vis-a-vis the environment have impact others very directly. And again, how we go about fixing these problems and dealing with these issues, that those do get somewhat political. But the thing that we cannot do is not engage. And there's historically been too much apathy around these questions, as if they're just going to go away. And I think here on the Wasatch Front, where we're speaking from, there's some really pressing issues, beyond the larger sorts of issues of climate change, which are serious and affecting our weather patterns and exacerbating our drought, no doubt. We have things like the Great Salt Lake, which is
Mm.
an environmental bomb that is waiting to go off, that's going to impact our families and the health of our families and the livability of this of these valleys. We have air quality issues that again, that they affect the most vulnerable among us. That the people who are already sick and have these conditions are disproportionately affected by that. And I can't sit by and see someone else suffer, right? That as a,
Mm.
as a Latter-day Saint, that's not an option for me, and I need to be educated on what it takes. How, what policies I advocate to go forward to solve that. Well, there's other fora for, for us to discuss those kinds of things, but that we have to be discussing it, that we have to be engaged. That's the imperative that we work on.
Yeah. Phil, anything you'd add as far as the dynamic of politics and these issues?
I think Chip sums that up really well. And the I'll give you some personal anecdotes.
Yeah.
I just gave a talk a few weeks ago in my ward here in Logan. I don't think we would call Logan a very left leaning town, or Cache Valley a left leaning place, right?
Uh-huh.
And the topic I was given was love for your neighbor. What does loving your neighbor mean? And I got up and spoke from my own perspective, and it made sense just because I was thinking about our upcoming board retreat, that Earth stewardship, and especially the inspiration from Bishop Cose's talk, is an act of loving your neighbor. Because your neighbor, well, the earth is your neighbor for one, and all of the creations that are within the earth are all of our neighbors. But also our human neighbors, we share the same watersheds. And I kind of, I explain these things in my love for it. And not one person gets up and starts screaming, you crazy liberal, you get out of here. No, that's because, you know, pollution does not care whether you are a Democrat or a Republican. It goes for the body no matter what.
Mm.
Water flows in the way it flows, not with no respect to your political party. And it doesn't matter what way you lean. If we up in the Bear River Basin don't use our resources prudently, it means the possibility of our neighbors down at the mouth, down in Great Salt Lake, may be breathing in arsenic, and that's rough.
Mm.
So I don't know if that's really anything that is too controversial to say, right? That we all have a responsibility to use our resources prudently. And I, I, I really like what Chip said earlier about us being a global church. That's one of the ways that I think you can overcome the political divisiveness we have over the issue in the U.S. in particular, is looking at the church as a global organization, because we have people in all different countries that live on all sides of the political spectrum. And when you go to some of those other places, it's not that they're perfect in their politics. They have their own problems. Every place has its own problems. But we'll give an example. When you go over to Europe, I've been to places like Sweden and talked to saints there, where Chip mentioned earlier, but other parts of Europe where you have people that are both very liberal, progressive, and also very conservative. And but when you talk about the environment, they all say we have different interpretations of how we want to approach that issue.
Mm-hmm.
But the baseline is that we care about it.
Yeah.
We're all working towards a common goal of making it better. And I think that's a big thing. And the one thing that people are always saying is that there's no silver bullet for how we can all solve these wicked problems like climate change or biodiversity loss around the world, of water and resources. But I think there actually is one silver bullet, and that's engagement.
Yeah.
If everybody is engaged, we can figure out how to live better, and we can figure out how to address the problems. But at the same time, keeping an understanding that what Chip said earlier, the environment is not a problem to be solved.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's fascinating, especially you talk about just the different solutions that are out there. And me speaking is, I'm a typical Utah, quite conservative Republican, and to me, it's like I don't necessarily have a problem like looking at these issues and considering solutions or things change. I guess it always comes down to like there's always this momentum or this pull of, well, it needs to be this big government solution, and if you're not on board with this government solution, you're sort of evil and you really don't care. And then I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, like I'm willing to talk about this, but I just don't think pouring a bunch of money into this or that solution is maybe something we should consider, but I'm willing to sit down and talk with it. Anything come to mind as far as that dynamic that comes up with politics?
I think that that you articulated really well the problem, right? That we go right to the kinds of solutions that we've been hearing about the most, because
Mm-hmm.
there's been one end of the political spectrum that's owned this, and so their ideas are the ones that are out there, kind of floating the most around. And what we need, and I can't emphasize this, enough, is that we need LDS perspectives at the table. And what I mean by that is not that we need conservative perspectives,
Right.
necessarily, but that we need to see this as an issue that we come together on, not one that out of the gate separates and divides us, right? And this is understanding again the kind of the spiritual principles on which these issues, and solutions to these issues are made, right? If if we see that, kind of agree on certain issues, right? That all creation is the Lord's, right? That we are stewards of this, and that we have a responsibility for this, and that our responsibility, for this, touches on our love and responsibility for other people, right? If that's the starting point of the conversation, that's a very different starting point than if we're starting saying, should government be involved or not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We might need to get to some of those kinds of questions, but it opens up the imagination, right? That we're motivated by love and by faith, as opposed to being motivated by fear and by, by kind of hegemonic threat or,
Yeah.
or something like this, that there's some kind of force that's going to come in, whether it's an environmental force that's going to come and, the apocalypse is going to come, or whether it's government that's going to come in and, take away my, my freedom somehow. We're starting in a very different place, and the imagination begins to open up, at that place about what, sorts of solutions there might be, right? Things that are maybe more market-based solutions as opposed to, government, based solutions. What is the role of nonprofits and of volunteer organizations and churches, right? That the thing that the environmental movement, in some ways, and I'm painting with a very broad brush here to say this, but got wrong, for decades, was leaving religion behind and constantly blaming religion for the problem, right? Saying,
Mm,
well, it's these kind of antiquated notions of dominion, right? That dominion means that I can do whatever I want with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm a religious person. That's not what I believe, right? That
yeah.
I see it very differently, right? That I see dominion is, it's related to this, the word for lordship, right? It's a stewardship, that's given, to me. So, so why have you kind of excluded these perspectives? Because it's precisely religion that deals with our morals and our sense of what's right and wrong. And we need that kind of motivation to motivate our action, not the fear of this, that, or the other. So I think if we recalibrate the discussion a little bit and we understand those common principles that we hold together, suddenly new opportunities and options begin to open themselves up to us, and we make a lot more progress on the issue, and not by compulsion, not by force, not by needing to to necessarily twist arms to make it happen. I think that it is an issue that we can really come together on if it's done the right way.
Yeah,
I love
and
that.
it's a um, our doctrine teaches that it's not about binaries, right? There's not simply heaven and hell. There's not simply um, this idea that there is a right and a wrong, but the way that we exist in the world doesn't necessarily uh, mark up that way, right? And that there's multiple kingdoms of living and ways of being, and I think that the same can kind of get into our cultural or political sensibilities as well, right? It's like it's Republican or Democrat, it's high end, super high rise residential, or it's single family home on big fat lot, or it's big government solution, or libertarian, we're just somewhat anarchist going away and everybody doing their own thing, right? There's so many things along the spectrum in so many ways that we can all contribute to it. So to kind of I think we should probably talk a little bit more about the practical solutions to the individual that you were going at from. In a little bit, I imagine we'll talk about one of our initiatives that we're doing right now with LDS Stewardship that involves talking about climate change. But to speak to you, specifically, Kurt, and you said, I'm kind of more conservative Republican. I'm open to discussions about these things, but I also just I don't generally just lean right away to a big government solution.
Yeah.
Let's talk about for example, this in the Wasatch Front, we've got water issues, right? We not only do we have water use issues, we also have water issues within it getting to the Great Salt Lake and shepherding water rights, very complex.
Mm-hmm.
In the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, and in others, they have plenty of market-based solutions to the problem that were at an individual level. They did a little experiment where they just went around in Utah. We don't measure what's called secondary water, so everything outside your house which is potable indoor water. So things that you use in your landscape for agriculture, for all things outdoors, that we call that secondary water. It's not metered officially in Utah. And that means that basically any secondary holding that you have, you can kind of use at your discretion. What they realized was that, man, maybe we just need to kind of get a little bit more accountability. Like, we won't start charging people more or anything like that. We'll just put a meter on it. Let's just so people know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And this is very market-oriented people, right? So they do that, and they have a sample of homes in the Weber Basin that just put meters on their home. That's literally all they did. And their usage went down by incredible amounts. Just from simply putting a meter on the home, not even starting to charge more, not even starting to do incentivization with markets. And I mean, if you're an individualistic, very kind of let the market decide for itself kind of person, I don't know how something like that couldn't really feel like you're making an impact, right?
Sure.
And there's examples like this all around in Great Salt Lake and in other parts of the world. But it's also what I'm trying to say there is that any and everything that we can do is needed, and we need all sorts of ideas to solve great issues, but also just to make living more enjoyable in our towns and our cities and our neighborhoods. Just everything that we do and that generally kind of feeds into these large scale issues is really just an amalgamation of small, tiny decisions that we all make in our households every day, right? So I guess, I don't know, that's maybe a long-winded way of saying that I don't subscribe to that idea that you're putting forth, that that there's anybody that can't do something about it.
Right.
And that can't also fit well with whatever their political, religious, business, personal sensibilities are.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounds like, I mean, with the LDS Earth Stewardship nonprofit, I mean, that the agenda there is mainly we just want to create a dialogue to start talking about ideas and making sure that we as Latter-day Saints at least are sitting at the tables where the solutions are being discussed and whatnot. Is that a good way to summarize it?
Yeah. And using our faith to make the argument, right? That we're engaged in these things, not despite the fact that we're Latter-day Saints, but because we're Latter-day Saints.
Yeah. So in that vein, like, I mean, what is there to learn as far as, like, there are certain maybe doctrines or traditions or concepts that make it more difficult to maybe get your message across or have the dialogue about it? For example, obviously we have a strong belief in multiplying and replenishing Earth, and that usually gets interpreted of where you have lots of kids, more the kids the better. And there's been, if I remember right, there's been various talks and statements made by general authorities in this concept of disputing the overpopulation concerns or whatnot. Is that a concern? And then what other concerns are there just in our tradition that make your mission a little more difficult?
I don't think, the question of population, that there was a book that came out in the 70s that awoke quite a bit of alarm, not just among Latter-day Saints, but among, other people, that was, about the population bomb, right? That there was going to be, this kind of, shortage of resources and all out war on, all against all. And most demographers don't actually believe in that, anymore. And we certainly, as an organization, support the teachings of the church about our God-given right and ability to make these kinds of choices, responsibly, with our spouses and with the aid of the Spirit. I think, Doctrine and Covenants 104 puts it really well, right? Where it says that there is enough and to spare, right? That there is enough and to spare. And that's an important principle, but you've got to take the other part of the scripture with it, and that is if things are done in the Lord's way, right? Which that
Mm,
the poor are exalted and the rich made low, right? That there's this argument that you've got to learn to share things. He doesn't tell us how we're going to do that. Law of consecration is a very specific way, which we're not asked to live right now, but we're still under the injunction to be good stewards. With this. I think that one of the biggest challenges that we face culturally speaking, and again, I emphasize there's nothing doctrinal, kind of in the way. We have, some of the most amazing, doctrine for a Christian denomination that I know of. It is rich. It is, it goes way back to the beginning of our of the restoration, and farther back than that. It helps us to understand ancient scripture in unique ways that this is our legacy and one of the things we bring to the table. But one of the cultural things that we also bring to the table is the kind of the political legacy of the Intermountain West. And Kurt, I think you articulated it really, really well. That there is this idea that the government has no kind of role in telling me how to live my life and what I do on my farm or my ranch or my
mm,
in my kingdom. That's and I think that again, if we don't kind of think about what that means and we kind of fall into that without any kind of reflection. I mean, it's problematic on a few levels, right? If we're extreme in that kind of vision, well, then what are we doing to help the poor? If it's all about me,
mm.
if I'm not ever doing anything to help, someone outside of myself, that's a real problem. Now, I'm not kind of accusing, us as a culture as that having that as a problem. I think that we've, I should say, it's maybe we do have some problems with that in that there are poor among us still, but I think we think about that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
I think that we need to kind of stretch our imagination a little bit to understand the way that we're connected to each other. And that private property is an important part of the way our society is set up. But that I have to be willing to kind of share the resources I've been blessed with. That seems like one of the things I have to balance. Being a Christian and being a Latter-day Saint. Um, Again, I think that if we automatically jump to, well, the only solutions are government intervention and compulsion of people, if I always am kind of lured into the lie that it's either the spotted owl or it's the lumberjack, well, then we're always going to see it as a head-on, kind of a conflict where
Yeah.
we're choosing one or the other, and that's the problem. That's not true, right? It's not one or the other, and so often, we simply need to go back to the basics and understand, well, what are our core values? Let's start there and let's build out from there to try to avoid some of these blind ends, these dead ends that that lead us to these kinds of impasses. That this is the richness of our belief and our doctrine.
Awesome. And Phil, anything to add there?
No, I think
Okay.
that's wonderful.
Cool. Awesome. Well, talk to me just about being a Latter-day Saint as I wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, like day to day. I mean, generally speaking, I'm, even the most staunch environmentalist could probably follow me around and probably not have a lot of issue with how I use resources or, I'm not indulging in any way, I don't think. But what are just some, as a Latter-day Saint in the typical life that we live, what are some things to consider as far as what we can do day to day?
Mm-hmm.
And is it come down to just the little things of whether I recycle or not, or how I use water, or should we be more engaged in other areas? What comes to mind?
I would refer back to that most recent talk that Bishop Cosset gave. Right, he says, I've got it in front of me here. I love the quote that he says.
Yeah.
There are many things we can do collectively and individually to be good stewards. Considering our individual circumstances, each of us can use the bountiful resources of the earth more reverently and prudently. We can support community efforts to care for the earth. We can adopt personal lifestyles and behaviors that respect God's creations to make our own living spaces tidier, more beautiful, more inspirational. He goes on to say we can be engaged in, if we're scientists, to make the greatest scientific advances that help the planet. We can be an architect who makes beautiful spaces that are sustainable. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. And I think it can also just be, as a Latter-day Saint, um, there have been some examples that we heard about recently at our board meeting of members who were aware that there were certain wards in the church that had come up with eco callings.
Oh yeah.
People who were just simply saying they were managing the stewardship of the local ward. So, something like events when they were putting on parties, ward parties or other events, just making sure that it was low waste, or, that they were making sure that there wasn't overuse or overconsumption. People who manage facilities, there's all sorts of ways we can cut down on those things. Recycling and composting at church buildings. If you want to go into something that's more specific to kind of a congregational way of living. But, it can also be just simple things that people want to be together. So, for example, Elders Quorum, every year, my Elders Quorum does service projects, right? And a lot of it is going and cleaning up people's yards, helping elderly members of the ward with, fall cleanup and other sorts of things. And brought up the question. I said, could our Elders Quorum go and do like a river cleanup one day if we wanted to? Just because the Logan River needs it. We've got all sorts of junk that pile up and don't want it going into our water. So can we do that? And they're like, yeah, of course. It's one of those things where sometimes we just are not imaginative because we're so used to doing certain habits. Walking, if you live in a walkable neighborhood, walk into church or bike into work, it saves you money. Gas is quite expensive these days, isn't it? Little things.
Yeah.
But it can also go to the greater spectrum too, because some people are politically involved and politically active. In fact, Utah is known as a very civically engaged state. So, I would say that if people are passionate about the right thing, they can go and be a part of it.
Yeah. Chip, anything you'd add to that?
Well, I like how, Phil is talking about this. This operates on two levels, right? And, the actions of the individual, are, you could make the argument that, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make that much difference whether you walk to church or you drive your car. That the amount of, of output, that's not going to tip the balance one way or the other. Of course, collectively, that does begin, to make an impact. But even on the individual level, I think about Doctrine and Covenants, 59, that, that talks about that that these things are given to us, to please the eye and to gladden the heart, right? Gratitude for the gifts that are received. There's an immediate payback from that. That we are happier, we are more at peace, we live more peaceably when we are grateful. And so even if sometimes those small actions, you could make the argument that they don't really make that much difference, they do to you and to those around you. And that would be reason enough, to do them. Some of these other issues, and in saying that, I don't mean to belittle some of the other, the importance of these other issues, which are enormous. Some of these issues we have time to work on and we can get better on. Others, there's an urgency. And I think it's really important for us to learn to, and the church has made a statement about information literacy, recently, because I think they recognize, the importance of this, but that we learn to get information from good and reliable sources about these issues, so that we can make a contribution to interventions, whatever the appropriate intervention is. If it's urgent, it needs to be urgent and quick. If we have more time on it, well, then we can, there's more time to work on it. But understanding and being able to use discernment and differentiate, between those, and understand, the cost and benefits of, of this or the other. That's on us, right? That we don't need to be commanded in all things. We're told that we need to be able to use our agency and our moral agency to make choices based on our morals and what we believe is right, and not simply rely on what someone is telling us to do.
Yeah. So maybe just going back to the LDS Earth Stewardship as an organization, as an entity here. What is it that that you do? Are you doing conferences? Are you doing meetups? Are you doing? I mean, maybe articulate more as like what this actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, all of the above. We do. We have regular monthly meetings as a that we learned through the pandemic that we don't actually have to be physically present with each other as much as we like to, and so we do meetings over Zooms. We have something called in the Company of Stewards where there's a discussion every month about a topic or a book. There are local book groups. There's local organizations. We have local organizations in Provo and in Salt Lake and in Germany and in Scotland and in the Philippines and in Ghana that organize activities kind of in those places. So that people can get together and do service projects and things like this. We mentioned the Gospel Library that we have online. This is an important resource to kind of be there when people are asked to, for example, talk about Bishop Coze's talk in a Elders Quorum or Relief Society meeting. That there's those kind of resources that they go get good information, about these kinds of things. And then there's we do kind of special lectures and things like that. Usually have a fall forum, sometimes even a spring kind of lecture. But one of the really exciting things that we've been engaged in the last few months. Started down at BYU Provo, that there was going to be a couple of speakers coming to campus, that every week we have either a forum or a devotional talk in the Marriott Center where the campus gathers together to hear them. And a couple of our speakers, one was Paul Cox, who's a very prominent LDS scientist and an environmentalist. He came in and gave a speech, as well as Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a professor out of Texas Tech. She's the lead scientist for the Nature Conservancy, and her specialty is communication about science. And particularly about climate change. And one of the things that distinguishes Dr. Hayhoe is that she is a committed Christian, and she's very forthright about that as an important part of her identity, and that kind of as I was suggesting before, she is not, well, she let out with this actually at her address, that she's not engaged in questions of climate, despite the fact that she's a Christian, but actually because she's a Christian, that she really sees this as connected to her faith. Students knew that these two speakers were going to be coming and were excited about it, and so they started organizing a campaign that they labeled Why Talk. So like Why Talk, and it's talking about sustainability, stewardship, and the climate. And they started tracking conversations that they were committed to sponsoring, I guess you could say, 1 million conversations about these issues, starting at BYU and kind of moving out into the world. And this is something that Catherine Hayhoe talks a lot about the way that we can come together on these issues. We need to talk to each other. We need to listen to each other and understand each other. Don't go into the conversation feeling like it's a conversation. I need to convince you, of this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence, but I need to go into the conversation and you need to understand why I think this is important, and I need to listen to you about why you're concerned about this or what your feelings are, about this. And by doing that we come closer together and we start moving towards solutions to these kinds of issues. So they started this, and some really creative people here at the university, they put together an app that you can go in and you can trace your conversation. It puts it on a map, and you can actually see a visualization, of these conversations going out into the world. So they've been doing this for a couple of months now, and they have over 43,000 conversations that have already happened. And the challenge is that when you have this conversation, that you leave the person with the challenge to go have a conversation with someone else. So, Kurt, I have a challenge for you.
Okay.
To talk to someone about climate change and what you think about climate change, and then you can go to the the Y Talk app that you can find, and you can upload your conversation there and
Oh, nice.
Get us towards 1 million.
Nice. Very cool. I'll take your challenge. So for sure. And Phil, what would you add as far as if someone wants to get involved, and where's a good starting point, or what would that look like?
Yeah. So if you're interested in the Y Talk initiative that Chip just said, that's actually housed in BYU's website. So it's sustainability.byu.edu. The backslash is climate dash conversations.
Okay.
That's for the Y Talk campaign, and highly encourage anyone to go and look at that and just see what's happening. If you want to be involved in the organization, it's LDS Earth Stewardship.org. So just LDS Earth Stewardship. You just put that all as one word. And what we have on the website is lots of different ways that people can be involved. They can utilize our gospel resources library that we've mentioned a couple of times here. Great for if you want to prepare a lesson or a talk that may have some of these elements baked into it. We also have actually a lesson plan that we've put on there in case people wanted to integrate it into a conversation about Bishop Kosei's talk, because that's typical that we once a month, usually there's a conference talk talked about. There's also getting involved in local groups if there's one in their area. There's lots of things going on. Like Chip mentioned, we've got several groups here in Utah on the Wasatch Front. We've got a group in the San Francisco Bay Area, one in the New York City area, one that's forming soonish in Toronto, one that's in the DC area, one that's in Ghana, one that's in Germany, one that is in UK, based up in Scotland, one that is in the Philippines.
Wow.
So saints around the world can hopefully get involved in some way. And then also you can be involved remotely. So you can tune into In the Company of Stewards. It's a monthly conversation that people have on webinars. There's the book groups. There is also starting a local group. If people have that desire to just organize some members of their ward and or an interfaith group of some sort in their area, they can start that. Also, you can serve the organization in ways that don't involve so much lift, whether it's just giving some of your time to, help push out some social media things, or if you're a web designer, or if you're a writer, or if you just we're also hoping that we can get people writing little guest blog posts in this upcoming year that are just talking about their experiences as Latter-day Saint who cares for the earth. Anyway, so there's all sorts of ways that you can get involved. Also, if you don't feel inclined to be doing all of those things, you've got too much going on in life, but you want to give, you can do that too. We're an organization that helps redirect those monies either towards our bigger efforts like Y Talk, but also towards local groups. We actually are support and do capacity building for local groups, and are hopefully going to be doing more campus capacity building, because we've seen this as a really, really important thing for young members of the church, people who are involved in institute or on the church sponsored campuses. So lots and lots of ways. LDSRstewardship.org is the place that you can go there.
Nice.
And like I said, learning resources, things to act, things to join in.
Just a few things. That's great.
Yeah, just a few
awesome.
things. I could go on. I mean, we could
I bet.
And so I'll just cite some of the things that people have been involved in, just to give you an example. We had, for example, I believe it's 2 months ago now, and In the Company of Stewards, where we've had people ranging from those who are total environmentalists. They've been in the national parks and they've been a steward over southern Utah landscapes for 45 years, ranging to somebody who is not an environmentalist in the least. They just really love biking everywhere, and they wanted to tell us why Latter-day Saints should consider multimodal transit as a way of being a good steward. And we've got it all over. People talking about their composting, and we've got local groups doing things such as our Earth Stewardship East group, which has a wonderful active contingency over there doing all sorts of things that are directly service related. So they were able to organize and get some additional grant monies besides our organizational support to build a native plant garden in a damaged landscape that is also a historical, a cultural landscape, and a beautiful, beautiful garden that is now kind of really coming into itself. It's been a few years now that it's been installed, and that changed some people's lives. There were people that they didn't know how to plant a plant when they first started it, and now they are native and or ecologically functional plant
Yeah.
experts. They're master gardeners. So it's never.
Well, and the other great thing about that particular project too is it was an interfaith project that was building this garden around a historically black church, and it built some really important bridges in that community. Between Latter Day Saints and some of the members of these other local congregations. That was really inspiring to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of my favorite things about the environment is that it just naturally has this way of bringing us together as people, uniting us, and then turning us to God.
Yeah.
Because you can't help but notice God in the environment, and so that's awesome.
You can't not. And I mean, if I were still in California, I would. It's also a way to have fun, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Like I would probably have a local group, and we'd do once a month Saturday beach cleanups and go for a surf after.
Yeah.
There's tons of ways we could just take joy in it too. It doesn't have to be all serious environmentalists.
Yeah.
We're all experts here at work. You really don't have to have all of the things.
Yeah. The last area I want to ask that I want to make sure we cover is just your organization's connection or relation to the church as an organization. I'm sure some people might think, oh, they're out there pushing the church to take this position or that position or protesting or whatever. But how would you describe how you engage with the church or your relationship with the church as an organization?
We see as our role to amplify the message coming from the church on these issues, and to to educate the fellow saints on the doctrines that have been preached. That if the church is interested in in our advice and take on things, we're happy to provide it. But that's it is not our job to to tell the leaders of the church how to to run the church at all. That it's more to amplify what the church says and what the church does. Phil mentioned that the church does way more than most of us are aware about being careful stewards of the resources that that we've been blessed with as an organization. And that there's lots of great stories there that still need to be told.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind a few more conference talks around this topic, right?
We welcome them. Yep.
Yeah, we always welcome those. Always welcome those. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll post all those links that Phil mentioned in the show notes, and obviously people can go to ldsearthstewardship.org to jump in and see all the details. Maybe as just as a closing question here, and Phil, let's start with you. Then Chip, you can answer. Like, just tell us from your spiritual place, what does the environment mean to you, and how does it bring you closer to Jesus Christ?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's hard to give a nice succinct answer, but for me, I'm a coastal child, so that's kind of my interlocutor, my little context I come from, and I can't help but think every time I jump into the water, into the ocean, to go for a paddle out or to go for a swim or just to watch the waves crash in, the vastness that I'm looking out over, the fact that over the millions, billions of things that make up a part of that ocean system, and then the landscape that feeds into it, they're all numbered, they're all loved, and I'm part of that. It makes me feel both infinitely small, but infinitely significant at the same time. And I can't help but really feel comforted by that, and really feel that it's a responsibility that I have to keep that fire alive within me and to share that with others. To be able to know that all the things that give me the most joy in life were created for that purpose. And that I should make sure that I fulfill the responsibility that comes along with having that joy.
Love it. Chip, what about you? What does environment mean to you from a spiritual standpoint, and how does it bring you closer to Jesus Christ?
Yeah, I love the way that that Phil put it. I had an experience as a young man that has been echoed in other kinds of experiences, but was distilled in a particularly poignant way when I was about 12 years old. I mentioned I was from the Midwest, but my mom's family lived out here in Utah, and my uncle and my grandpa, something possessed them, I don't know why, to invite me on a backpacking trip up through Yellowstone. And it was, my family growing up, we weren't particularly outdoorsy kind of people. We like going on walks and stuff like that, but we lived in the suburbs. And um, here I come out to this landscape of the West that is on a scale that's kind of difficult for my kind of young mind to kind of really wrap its head around. And we get up there in Yellowstone, and kind of like Phil is saying, it was the grandeur of that amazingly beautiful place, that made me feel so small in so many ways, and yet, like he's saying, so loved too. Like that this is here, for me to be able to take part in. And I think that it was significant too that it was my family, that introduced this to me. That it was a place that where we could kind of come together, and it's continued to be that, these places that where we live, where we can get out and step outside of the flow of our daily routine and remind ourselves about what's most important. And I feel the Spirit in unique ways when I slow down and I'm reminded of all of these amazing gifts and the way that I'm connected to everything. That connection is, on the first level, it's a kind of a biological chemical connection to everything, right? That my body is made up of the same elements of what I see around me, and I eat and take these things into myself. But that's kind of a metaphor for the spiritual connection, too, that I feel that the people that who live with me in my house, my family, I'm connected with, my neighborhood, I'm connected with, right? And I need to be reminded of the ways that we're connected, and and that I'm connected to brothers and sisters that I've never seen before, some of whom are suffering, right? And that their sorrow and their joy are my sorrow and my joy, and I'm thankful for these amazing gifts that I'm given, to be able to be reminded of these responsibilities, and ultimately the love that my Savior has for me, that provided them all in all their grandeur.